The first thing Daniel Mercer noticed was the silence. Not the normal kind of silence people expect in the wilderness. Alaska had never been quiet. Even when nobody was around, the forests breathed. Wind moved through the spruce trees. Snow shifted from heavy branches. Ravens called somewhere in the distance. But this silence felt wrong. Like the entire forest was listening. Daniel adjusted the straps of his backpack and checked the trail marker nailed to a tree. The faded red paint was nearly invisible beneath frost. Trail 8B. At least he was still on the route. He looked up at the gray sky filtering through endless black spruce. Sunset was coming faster than expected. In Alaska, daylight disappeared quickly once the clouds rolled in. His phone had already died 3 hours ago. Perfect, he muttered. Daniel had come to Alaska for one reason, to escape. 2 months earlier, his younger brother Tyler had died in a car accident outside Seattle. Since then, Daniel couldn't sleep without hearing the phone call again. Couldn't sit in his apartment without feeling trapped. Every room reminded him of Tyler. So he booked a solo hiking trip near Denali National Park, hoping isolation would clear his head. Instead, isolation was beginning to terrify him. A sharp crack echoed somewhere behind him. Daniel froze. It sounded like a branch snapping under someone's weight. He slowly turned around. Nothing. Only trees. Dark, endless trees. He stared for several seconds, trying to calm himself. Probably a moose. Or maybe the cold making branches split. Still, he kept looking longer than necessary. Because something felt off. He continued down the narrow trail, boots crunching against frozen dirt. The deeper he walked into the forest, the darker it became. Snow patches covered the ground like pale scars beneath the trees. Then he saw it. Footprints. Fresh ones. Daniel stopped instantly. The prints crossed directly over the trail ahead of him. Large boots. Deep impressions in the mud. Not animal tracks. Human. He crouched beside them. The strange part wasn't that someone else had been hiking. The strange part was the direction. The footprints came from the woods on one side of the trail, and disappeared back into the woods on the other side. Whoever made them hadn't stayed on the path. They had crossed it. Quietly. Watching. A cold feeling settled in Daniel's stomach. He stood and looked around again. "Hello?" he called. No answer. Only silence. Then, somewhere deep in the trees, a faint whistle. 3 short notes. Daniel's heart skipped. "Hey," he shouted. "You okay out there?" Nothing responded. The whistle didn't repeat. The forest returned to complete stillness. Daniel tried convincing himself it was another hiker messing around. But the sound hadn't felt normal. It sounded distant and hollow, like someone copying a bird call without understanding how birds actually sounded. He walked faster. The trail eventually opened into a small clearing with an abandoned ranger cabin near the edge of a frozen creek. Daniel immediately recognized it from the map he'd studied before the trip. Miller's Rest Station. Unused since the late 1990s. Relief flooded through him. If the storm clouds overhead turned into snow tonight, shelter would matter. The cabin looked rough but stable. Half the roof sagged under old snow, and one window was boarded shut, but the structure still stood. Daniel climbed the creaking steps and pushed the door open. The smell hit him instantly. Dust. Rotting wood. Something damp. He clicked on his flashlight and scanned the room. A rusted stove sat in one corner beside broken cabinets. An old cot leaned against the wall. But someone had been here recently. A metal thermos rested on the table. Fresh ashes sat inside the stove. Daniel's breathing slowed. "Okay," he whispered. Not abandoned. He should have felt safer knowing another person was nearby. Instead, the fear grew stronger. Because if someone was staying here, where were they now? Another sound came from outside. Crunch. Like footsteps in snow. Daniel spun toward the window. Nothing moved beyond the glass. Then, 3 whistles again. Closer this time. Daniel grabbed the hunting knife from his backpack. Who's there? No response. He stepped carefully toward the door and opened it. Cold wind blasted his face. The clearing was empty. The trees surrounding the cabin stood perfectly still. But as Daniel stared toward the woods, he noticed something that made his chest tighten. A figure. Far between the trees. Motionless. Watching him. Too dark to see clearly. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Hey! The figure didn't move. It just stood there. Tall. Thin. Then slowly, it stepped behind a tree and disappeared. Daniel immediately ran forward several feet into the clearing. Wait. Nothing. Only forest. His pulse hammered inside his ears. He backed toward the cabin again without taking his eyes off the trees. Every instinct screamed the same thing, you are not alone. Inside the cabin, Daniel locked the door with a rusted metal latch and tried starting a fire in the stove. His hands shook while lighting matches. Outside, darkness fully settled over the forest. Snow began falling softly. The cabin creaked as wind moved through the trees. Daniel sat near the stove gripping the knife tightly. At 9:14 p.m., he heard footsteps outside again. Slow. Crunching through snow. Circling the cabin. Daniel held his breath. The footsteps stopped beside the wall. Silence. Then, tap. Something lightly touched the window. Daniel turned his flashlight toward it. Nothing there. Another tap. This time from the opposite side of the cabin. Then another. And another. Like someone walking around the cabin, touching each window one at a time. Daniel's fear turned into panic. Leave me alone, he shouted. Everything stopped. Silence again. Complete silence. For nearly 10 seconds. Then came a voice. Soft. Barely above a whisper. Daniel, his blood went cold. He stood instantly. No. No, no, no. There was no possible way. How do you know my name? He yelled. No answer. The voice returned from outside the cabin. Daniel, but something about it sounded wrong. Like someone imitating human speech after hearing it only once. The pronunciation was awkward. Unnatural. He backed away from the door. Then the voice changed. Danny, Tyler used to call him that. Only Tyler. Daniel's entire body froze. Tears instantly filled his eyes. Impossible. His brother was dead. The voice repeated it again. Danny, this time directly outside the door. Daniel stared at the handle. Slowly, very slowly, it began turning. The latch rattled violently. Daniel stumbled backward holding the knife in both hands. The door shook once. Twice. Then stopped. Silence. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then heavy footsteps moved away from the cabin and disappeared into the forest. Daniel barely slept that night. Every small sound kept him awake. Sometimes he thought he heard breathing outside the walls. Sometimes faint whistles far away in the trees. At sunrise, he packed immediately. The moment daylight appeared, he left the cabin behind. Snow covered most of the trail now, making navigation difficult. Daniel checked his map repeatedly while moving through the freezing morning air. He just needed to reach the main ranger station by evening. That was the plan. But after nearly 3 hours of hiking, he realized something horrifying. The trail markers had disappeared. Completely. No red paint. No signs. Nothing. Daniel turned in circles trying to recognize landmarks, but every direction looked identical. Trees. Snow. Fog. He had gotten lost. "Come on," he whispered desperately. His breathing quickened. He chose a direction and kept walking, hoping he'd eventually reconnect with the trail. Then he heard it again. 3 whistles. Close. Daniel spun around. A figure stood between the trees roughly 50 yards away. The same tall shape from last night. Watching him, Daniel started backing away. The figure copied him. 1 slow step backward. Like a mirror. "What do you want from me?" Daniel shouted. The figure tilted its head strangely. Then it vanished behind the trees again. Daniel turned and ran. Branches slapped his face while he pushed through snow-covered undergrowth. His backpack bounced violently against his shoulders. Behind him, crunching footsteps. Following. Not running. Walking. Slowly. Calmly. Daniel ran harder. Eventually he burst into another clearing and nearly collapsed from relief. A cabin stood ahead. Different from the first one. Smoke rose from its chimney. Someone actually lived there. Daniel sprinted toward it and pounded on the door. An older man opened it almost immediately. Gray beard. Heavy winter coat. Shotgun resting against the wall behind him. The man studied Daniel carefully. "You alone?" he asked. Daniel nodded rapidly. "Something's following me." The man's expression changed instantly. "Get inside." Daniel entered quickly while the man locked the door. The cabin interior was warm and lit by lanterns. Animal hides covered parts of the walls. "My name's Walter," the man said. "Sit down." Daniel explained everything. The footprints. The whistles. The voice outside the cabin. Walter listened silently the entire time. When Daniel finished, the old man looked deeply unsettled. "You heard it speak?" Daniel nodded. Walter stared into the fire for several moments before answering. "You need to leave these woods before nightfall." "What is it?" Walter hesitated. "Locals call it the listener." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" "It watches hikers. Hunters. Campers." Walter's voice stayed low. "Learns their voices. Learns names." Daniel felt sick. "That's impossible." Walter didn't argue. Instead, he stood and grabbed an old photograph from a shelf. He handed it over. The picture showed 3 missing hikers from years earlier. One of them looked barely 18. "They disappeared in 2004, Walter said quietly. Search teams found campsites, footprints, supplies, but no bodies. Daniel stared at the photo. Then noticed something disturbing. In the background between the trees, a tall blurry figure. Watching. Walter continued. "People hear loved ones calling for help out there. Dead relatives. Friends. Children." He pointed toward the forest outside. "If you follow the voice into the trees, you don't come back." Daniel's mouth felt dry. "What is it exactly?" Walter shook his head slowly. "Don't know. Don't want to know." The cabin suddenly creaked. Walter went still. So did Daniel. Outside, footsteps circled the cabin. Slowly. Crunch. 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 Walter immediately blew out 2 lanterns. "Quiet," he whispered. The footsteps stopped beside the wall. Then came the voice. "Walter." Perfectly copying Daniel's voice. Walter closed his eyes briefly. "It learns fast," he muttered. The voice spoke again from outside. "Please let me in," exactly Daniel's voice. Every word identical. Daniel felt his stomach twist in terror. Then another voice came from outside. A woman's voice. Walter's expression changed instantly. "No," he whispered. The woman sounded desperate. "Walter, help me," Daniel looked at him. "Who is that?" Walter didn't answer. Tears filled the old man's eyes. "My wife," he whispered. "She died 11 years ago." The voice outside became softer. Closer. "Walter," a shadow passed across the window. Tall. Thin. Not human. Walter grabbed the shotgun. "You stay away from the door." The thing outside scratched lightly against the wood. Then came multiple voices at once. Different people. Different tones. Whispering together. Laughing softly. Crying. Begging. Daniel covered his ears. The sounds didn't feel real. They felt wrong. Like dozens of stolen voices stitched together. Suddenly. Bang! Something slammed against the cabin wall hard enough to shake the room. Walter aimed the shotgun toward the door. Another slam. Then silence. Complete silence. Minutes passed. Neither man moved. Finally, Walter whispered, "Back room." "Now." Daniel followed him quickly into a small storage room. Walter opened a trapdoor hidden beneath a rug. "There's an old snowmobile trail half a mile east," he said. "Follow it. Don't stop walking. You're coming too." Walter shook his head. "It wants someone inside scared enough to run." He handed Daniel a flare gun. "If you hear voices, ignore them." Another loud bang shook the cabin. The door frame cracked. Walter chambered a shell into the shotgun. "Go." Daniel hesitated only a second before climbing through the trapdoor tunnel leading outside. Freezing wind hit him instantly. He ran. Behind him, another violent crash echoed from the cabin. Then a gunshot. Daniel kept running through deep snow, barely able to breathe. The forest around him looked endless. Dark shapes moved between trees. Or maybe fear imagined them. Then he heard it again. "Danny," Tyler's voice. Close beside him. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut and kept running. "Danny, wait," the voice sounded hurt now. Weak. Like his brother was dying somewhere behind him. Daniel almost turned around. Almost. But Walter's warning repeated inside his mind. "If you follow the voice, you don't come back." Snow fell harder. The wind screamed through the trees. Then Daniel saw it ahead. The snowmobile trail. Relief exploded through him. He stumbled onto the path and followed it downhill. Behind him came one final whistle. 3 notes. Closer than ever before. Daniel looked back. The figure stood directly at the edge of the forest. Tall enough to nearly touch the lower branches. Its body looked wrong. Too thin. Too long. And where its face should have been, there was only darkness. Then it spoke one last time. In Tyler's exact voice. "Why did you leave me?" Daniel fired the flare gun instantly. Red light exploded across the snowy trail. For one brief second, the creature became visible. Its skin stretched tightly over twisted limbs. Its mouth hung unnaturally wide. And dozens of human teeth filled its jaw. Then it vanished back into the forest. Daniel ran until sunrise. Search teams found him nearly unconscious beside a highway outside the park. Walter's cabin was never located again. Neither was Walter. Authorities assumed hypothermia and stress caused Daniel's hallucinations. But Daniel knows what he heard in those woods. Even now, months later, He wakes up some nights to faint whistles outside his apartment window. 3 short notes. Waiting. Listening. Learning his voice.